Is that a yes?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I guess we're broadcasting now.
That goes to YouTube.
Okay, so where were we? So just this idea that this is what we'd call a function with an unknown number of inputs. So, you know, we could do math.max with 2 values. We could do math.max with 5 values. We don't know how many inputs are going in.
So what does math.max do again?
It's finding the maximum number of this set. So the idea here is that with the arguments object, given that we've got this array of arguments that have provided, we can just go and write a dynamic implementation for a function that would look through any number of arguments, whether you give it 2 arguments or you give it 50 arguments, and it will operate across all of the arguments. This is what we'd call overloading a method. So we overload the thing to go and take unlimited numbers of arguments, and it just operates across all of them. So for our implementation here, let's just do return argument 0 times arguments 1. Select that no variable. What is that? The factorial? What is the result? No, the product. Man, it's been too long since math class.
Mathematics. Can I just console.log the invocation directly without passing through like product?
Sure. Yeah, we could definitely go and just do the invocation directly in here.
This is better than implicit.
Doesn't really matter. This is more just a notes file for everybody to read along with. Okay, questions there in arguments object, what it's doing and why we would use it for stuff. Basically, the cool thing about arguments is it says a function doesn't just have to take a number, known number of inputs. It can take unlimited numbers of inputs and then decide what to do with it and how to behave based on the number of inputs. And this is a really powerful thing for JavaScript to be able to do that so dynamically. Okay, yes, now we're going to go on to reference versus invocation.
I have a question.
Sure.
Can we return more than one result?
Jose asked, can I return more than one result from a function? There are some languages where you can actually return multiple values out of a method. JavaScript does not allow this. If you want to return multiple values, you would return an array or else an object that has all of the stuff that you want out of it. Okay, let's do function beep. And when we beep, we're going to console.log beep. Okay. So let's talk about the difference between console.log beep and console.log beep. Add some white space to go and make that a bit more obvious. Okay, so these look very similar, right? What should we get from line 36? Jose, what do you think? What would line 36 give us?
I would just say that it's a function type or something.
Yes. And then, Kat, what should we get out of line 38? Actually, let's return beep. There we go. What should line 38 give us?
String.
Yep, okay, so let's run this, give it a shot. Yeah, okay, so this is a big difference. This idea here on line 36, all we're doing, a function is just a data type. Jose, you got a question?
No.
Oh, I see. Hand raised. A function is just an object. It's a type of data. So like a string, like a Boolean, like a number, a function is just another type of data. And like any other type of data, we can reference said piece of data. And so when we just go and reference the name of the function, this is what we'd call a reference right here. Reference to the function. And so when we call it by name without any kind of parentheses to go and invoke it, we're just referencing the function object itself, that piece of data which happens to be a function. To actually invoke it, invocation of the function. So to actually invoke it, we use that parentheses operator here. And that's the guy that actually goes and calls the thing, tells it to run, do its job. Okay, so this is reference versus invocation. This is a really big difference, and it catches up a lot of people getting started with it because they'll be going and just referencing the thing by name. Like in Ruby, people coming from Ruby get hung up on this because in Ruby, anytime you reference a function, it automatically runs the thing. I should call it a method. Anytime you reference a Ruby method, it just automatically runs. In JavaScript, you can reference a function as a piece of data, or you can tell it to invoke itself and run. Okay, let's do another fun one about declaration versus assignment. So we've probably seen this just in a lot of Vox code even. So we've got function beep, let's call this function beep D. Return beep. And let's do var beep a equals function. Okay, we've seen these two patterns before. People seen these? There's like, okay, there's this thing where you go and you declare function, you give the function a name, and then it returns a value. And then down here, there's this thing where, okay, I set a variable and I give it an unnamed function, an anonymous function. And what's...
That confuses me so much.
Yeah, okay, so what the heck is going on? What are these two things? This is a very, very common thing, and nobody really understands what the difference between these two are. And there's a really big difference. It's a very subtle difference, but it's a big difference. Technically, we can use these things the same way. So I could do beep D, and I could do beep A. Both of them are going to be invoked the same way. Incidentally, this one here is what we call a declaration. And then this one here is what we call an assignment. Hence the D and the A. So, what is the difference? You guys heard of the term hoisting before? You guys haven't? Have you heard of hoisting? Hoisting is always one of these things that everybody gets into hoisting. You're like, what the hell is hoisting? And it confuses everybody. They know it's this really strange thing in JavaScript, and it's totally confusing, and nobody wants to deal with it. The thing that I describe hoisting as is a declaration is omnipresent in our code. If we've declared it, it is available everywhere in our code, regardless of where it is. An assignment, this guy down here, is only available after it has been assigned. So let's, for example, so if we do up top here, let's do beep D and beep A. What should we get out of this? Kat, what are you thinking?
I have no idea. Oh,
Nan, what do you get?
it says beep A is not a function.
Yeah,
I
okay,
haven't assigned it yet.
right.
Calling it.
There's a really big difference between these two. So I am, hey Steve. Just in time. We're talking about hoisting.
Nice. He screams and runs out.
Okay, sorry, Steve just came in. So Steve, just to catch you up, the one we're looking at right now is declaration versus assignment. So these are both JavaScript functions, right? Written in two different styles. One is we're declaring this function here with the name beepd, beep declaration. And then down here, this guy here is beep assignment. It's a variable with an anonymous function assigned to it. These things are technically the same. If we run the things down here, they should both do what we would expect them to do. So a lot of ways you could say these two are identical. There's no difference between them. But if we go up top here, run this guy, the first one works. Just actually log out declaration and assignment. Okay, so if we look at the output on this guy, we're calling both of these functions up on line 45 and 46. So the declaration is on line 50. So we can say that we're calling both of these before we've done any of this setup. The declaration is working. So it runs up on line 45, even though the declaration is down on line 50. The assignment down on line 58 is causing an error. So the difference between declaration and assignment. Declaration is hoisted. Who cares what hoisting means? Effectively, the net result is when you do a declaration is omnipresent within your code. You can call it anywhere, and it just works. It's been moved to the top, and it's just available within your whole program.
So
it's hoisted to the top. Yep. In assignment, however, assignment is subject to control flow, as in control flow is our program runs line by line going downward. And so if on line 46 we try to call this function, which was defined down on line 58, the assignment hadn't happened at the point of line 46, therefore that's an error.
how that works like in multiple files? Because files are loaded as synchronous, right?
As in like a Node application?
No, like on a browser you list the scripts like top to bottom, right? The scripts that you invoke.
So
Yeah.
wouldn't you just reference the, like, wouldn't you just say put the import that JavaScript file before all that code that you want?
Yeah, so
Oh,
on the front end, you have to go and stack all of your JavaScript dependencies in the order which they'll be used.
okay, so you have like have a statement.
A lot of that, if you're doing it with multiple scripts, it's just the include order inside of the HTML document.
So there's no chance that you could like load the second one first before the first one.
In JavaScript, script tags are synchronous. Those things there, when you have a script tag in a document, that's a synchronous operation. It goes out, it gets the script, it blocks HTML rendering subsequent script loading because it says that there's this dependency order that we need to honor.
Okay.
That's why loading multiple scripts in succession is actually a really bad thing for your page performance. You want to load only one JavaScript file so you're not waiting on this whole tree of files to go and load up individually. Okay, and so then just as a general rule that I suggest for people, given the fact that these things are generally, pretty much the same in terms of their usage, if we can choose between doing a declaration versus doing an assignment, use a declaration, because a declaration is not prone to as many it's not subject to control flow. So therefore, the chances of misusing it and calling it at the wrong time are significantly lessened. So if it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, just choose the declaration over the assignment.
So why would you use an assignment instead of a declaration?
Assignments definitely have their place. Like when you're managing functions inside of a little operation, you'll sometimes go and stick a function into a variable and hold it and then do things with it and then replace it with something else and do something else with that. So there are definitely places where assignment applies. But a lot of times, like you go and you look at a lot of the Box front-end code, there's a lot of places where assignment is used just because it was the style that was chosen. There's no syntactical reason why assignment was needed for this. It was just somebody started writing variables and assigning functions to them, and you could just as easily have done declaration and avoided some pitfalls of control flow.
And what happens if you say make another declaration with the same function name? Does it just override the previous function, or does it depend on like the hierarchy of
I believe it will override, and it should be in control order. So declaration 2, let's try it. Yep, so it just overrides it.
Say if you did B, D, and you actually accepted arguments in it, would you still have both available to you?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. So
You can do like overloading.
So overloading, Steve, we looked at overloading earlier.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Overloading is done with the arguments object. So you've got one function and it receives this thing called arguments. And arguments is an array-like object that's got a list of all of your arguments that were provided to the function. And so overloading is you've got one instance and then you can go and look through all of the different arguments and respond to them in different ways. But it's still only one function.
And that's the same if like you declare something, if you like assign a variable to the function name. Like instead of like you have function beepd and if you have var beepd.
Yeah, so var beepd would do the same thing. It would just override, but it would not.
But just if it was called after the variable.
So technically, this guy here is also a declaration. This is a variable declaration. So this would also be subject to the same rules of being made omnipresent, being hoisted. And so probably we're going to get beepd as undefined this time. No. Okay. Don't do that, Jose.
It's okay.
I don't know exactly what happened, but long story short, don't do that. Unique names. Okay. Any questions on declaration versus assignment?
Oh, earlier when you did the declaration 2.
Declaration 2.
For like if you like the function bd, you like put it underneath and you had a console log declaration 2 and it overrided it. So in that case, would it be subject to control flow if you like reassigned it?
Yeah, so if we go and we make another function with the same name, this second guy would override the first.
Okay.
But again, we shouldn't be doing that to begin with.
Yeah.
Like that should be something that as a developer, we're savvy to the fact that we're not going and conflicting our own names with ourselves.
But that's fine. Usually we only do that with variables, right? Reassigning them.
Yeah, this whole thing goes and gets the magic of scope thrown into it also. So we'll be talking about scope in a little bit. Let me just put some banners in here. Incidentally, all this code that I'm going through right now, I'm going off of a just notes file that's in that repository. So all of this JavaScript that I'm typing up here is in this notes file, if you guys want to go and open that up. It's also got some expanded code examples that I'm not writing all the way out. Okay, so Kat, what was the arguments object?
So you can pass arguments into it, and then like just do multiples of those. Like a variable, like you can just put a variable. Well, not really a variable, but like can't work.
When we pass arguments to a function, those arguments are made available to us within the function where? We can get them as as argument variables, or they're available to us through the arguments object, which is an array-like structure that has all of our arguments listed. None. What was the difference between reference and invocation?
So reference, it's just, sorry. So reference, you're just referencing a function. So it'll, if you put it in and you console log it, it'll show you the actual function. And invocation, you're invoking or calling the function and it'll actually perform it.
Yeah, great. Great definition of that. Yep. And then what else do we do up here? Then, Jose, what's the return of a function? What does a function return?
Oh, it's just to spit the results out.
Yep. And then that's the end of the function. Cool. Okay. And then last for this section here, let's look at functions as first-class objects. So this is another thing that's really, really unique about JavaScript. And this is the thing that makes all the parts about JavaScript that suck a whole lot less. Because while there's a lot of things that JavaScript got wrong and that it was built as a language in 10 days that some guy hacked together and shipped quickly, functions are amazingly powerful and he actually got these things right. And what we can do with a function is what really stands JavaScript apart from a lot of other languages and why it's become the fixture that it has in stuff like Node because of the way that it does functions and it can use the things. So let's just look at the 4 places and 4 ways we can actually use functions. We talk about a first-class object, we think of it as like a first-class citizen inside of the program. So something like in Ruby, methods are blocks of code. They're not things you can pass around. They're not objects themselves. It's just a block of code. We've seen already a little bit that we can take a function and we can just treat it like a piece of data. We can hand it all over the place and just do stuff with this thing like a piece of data, or we can call it, invoke it, and make it run its stuff. So let's just look at the things that we can do with functions and the ways we use them. So let's look at functions may be assigned to variables, as in var honk equals function. So we saw this in assignment. This is the idea. So we've got a variable, and a function is just a piece of data. And so we can take a function, we can stick it in this variable and just store it there as a piece of data, and then reference it as a piece of data. Pretty straightforward. 2. Functions may be stored within data structures. So if I've got an object, let's say var car is an object. Our car, we saw objects yesterday. Let's give it some keys. Model, it's what? A chord. And it's got a honk function on it. So just like any other piece of data, a function can be stuck inside of an object structure and just be assigned to one of the keys of a collection. The same thing goes to arrays. We can take a function, we can drop it into an array as an element in an array. So just like any other piece of data.
So a function can be a piece of data inside of an object.
Yep. Yeah, so again, this idea of first-class citizen, it's a first-class citizen just like any other data type. So anything that we could do with a string or a Boolean or a whatever other piece of data, we could do the exact same thing with a function, with the added benefit of we can also invoke the function, which is something that other data types can't have done on them. So what else can we do with a function object? We can, this one's pretty cool. functions may be passed as arguments to other functions. Where have we seen this before? Anybody remember something we did yesterday where we were actually passing a function as an argument to another function? The random thing? No, not random. Think about in the DOM exercise that we were doing.
Oh, okay.
What were we doing with? Yeah. So when we did add event listener, that's a function that the DOM was giving us, and we were giving it what? 2 arguments. We would give it click, and then we would give it a function, which we're actually passing as an argument to that add event listener method. So we're actually taking this function, we're passing it as a piece of data as an argument over to add event listener. So if we looked at kind of what add event listener looks like where it's defined, it would be something like function add event listener, event name, and handler.
You don't necessarily need to do that, right? The add event listener, you don't need to make it a function. It's already.
Yeah, you don't need to make it a function. Just using this as an example.
Oh.
But like if we were to look at how somewhere, someplace in the bowels of the DOM, somebody had defined an add event listener function for the DOM API, it would look something like this. It says, I'm a function called add event listener, and I accept an event name as an argument, which is what type of data? What's this guy?
That's a function.
This guy here, the click. Click is a string.
Oh, okay.
So we're passing, when we call add event listener, we're passing 2 arguments to it. So we're giving it the event name that we want to bind to, which is a string. And then we're giving it as a second argument a function, which is just getting passed over to this guy and being used inside of add event listener.
So is this different from like on click?
Yes, on click is a different, and again, that's all DOM specific. That's like the DOM has many different implementations of handling events. But the fundamental thing we're interested in here is the fact that functions are objects that can just be passed around to other functions as arguments of the function. Cool. Questions? Okay, and then the last thing that kind of is the unique thing about what functions can do and how they work together. Functions may be returned from other functions. And then this is the really trippy one, where we have something like function meta program, which is a function that returns a function that does something else. So you'll see this stuff all over the place as you get into bigger and hairier libraries. Like D3, the library, is entirely built on this pattern here. The idea of we've got a method and then we call on this method and it goes and it builds something new and hands us, this is kind of the scaffold for partial applications, and this idea of we have a pre-configured function built to go and run a specific task. This is really advanced. Like this is the most advanced pattern of functions.
It's kind of like closures.
Yeah, it's using closures. Well, closures are next up on the list.
Very distant closures.
Okay, so Kat, what do we mean by first-class objects?
It's basically like a first-class citizen, and you can do a lot of things with it.
Right. You can use it like any other piece of data.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, and so without looking, what could we do with it, number one? Or name one thing.
You can use it, put it, you can use it in an argument, like pass it through as an argument.
Yep, pass a function to another function as an argument.
Yeah.
Great. Non, what's something else we can do with a function?
You can assign it to a variable.
Assign it to a variable. Awesome. Jose.
You return it from a function.
Yeah, return it from a function. A function returns another function. Steve.
It can be stored on as a member on an object.
Awesome. Yep. Cool. So that is the general uses and use cases for functions throughout JavaScript. So functions as first-class objects. All right. So that's part one. That's the top layer of our little benthic zone here. Now we're going to start diving into deeper water. Doesn't get too bad too fast. You guys want to take a break or anything? Or okay. Let's go on to part two. We'll do closure and scope. First of all, let's address something right here. Let's talk about the IIFE. Immediately invoking function expression. And we've all seen these guys. It looks kind of like this. You guys seen those before?
Oh, it's not that like the jQuery initialization does something like that.
Yeah, jQuery does a bunch of stuff like this. This is a really, really common pattern, and we're going to need to use it here in the next few things, next few examples. Console.log. I am running in a private scope. Okay, so what's going on here? Oh, I need to clear up my error from above that we're reading.
Isn't this the pattern that that we're supposed to use in course?
Yes, although I'm kind of debating ways that we can go and use it a little bit more elegantly. We're overusing it a little bit to the point of kind of a performance hit. But yes, it's good for a lot of reasons. Starting out here, a function is what we'd call a closure, and a closure is a black box of code. So let's do var a equals 5, var b equals 10. Let's console log out a and b right here. And then let's console log out A and B right here. So a function itself is a little black box. It's what we call a closure. It says closure, nothing can see inside of a closure. However, things inside of a closure can see outwards. So in this case here, what this technically is a function that is just being immediately invoked. It's got a little call on the end of it. You're looking.
Yeah. Why?
So the reason that this pattern exists and why it's so popular is that if we want to go and set up
Just like to separate scope.
I'm kind of jumping ahead on this one. This is an awkwardly placed note. Why don't we do just variable scoping first and then come back to this? Trying to explain a pattern before we've actually explained variable scope. Okay, so let's do variable scoping. Okay, so I've got var n equals 5. I've got function, just call it test. And then we'll say var n equals 10, console.log n. And then we'll run test. And console.log n. Okay, so up front, what do we got? N is 5. We've got a function. We've reassigned n as being 10 inside the function. We call on it. I feel like I'm missing a part of this thing that I usually do on the whiteboard, except I've got Scott on the... Hey, Scott, do you mind just listening?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay, sounds good. I'm going to draw on the whiteboard. Okay, let's do function Washington. Okay, and then we'll put, we need a variable inside of Washington. Bar, what's in Washington? Monuments. Equals true. Okay, so we're going to put non in Washington. And Kat is going on vacation.
Yes.
Finally.
And Kat is not in Washington. Okay, so the question is, can non see the monuments in Washington?
Yes.
Yes, because she's inside of Washington. Kat, who's on vacation, can she see the monuments?
No.
No, she's not on vacation. Or she's on vacation, so therefore not in Washington, can't see the thing. So we would say this guy right here, this guy is a closure. So closure says this thing here is a black box. Anything outside of the black box can't see into the black box. Things inside of the black box can see in here. Now, Kat, Non is following Kat on what, Instagram or something to go and sail your trip photos. So let's say Kat is saying our photos equals true. Can Non follow Kat's photos?
Yeah.
Yeah, she can check out all of her photos as she's posting the things. So Non, while she's in Washington, can still look up and see Kat's
So
photos.
if Kat was down here, she could see that.
Yeah, we're getting there. Okay, so this is what we call closure. Closure is the black box. Things outside of the black box can't see into the black box. Inside of the black box, we've got this thing called scope. Scope is a space where variables and functions can be declared. So Non is inside of the scope of Washington. Cat is currently in the scope of whatever is above it. So let's say, well, let's come back to that one. Okay, Steve, what neighborhood do you live in?
Shaw.
Okay, we're gonna do crazy function inside a function. Okay. So Steve lives in Shaw. What's in Shaw?
Big Bear Cafe.
Big Bear.
Big Bear.
Oh man,
I live in
are we
Truxton
really gonna do
Circle
this?
technically.
Okay,
It's a block
and
away.
then here's Steve. Pam, what's your neighborhood?
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn, not to be confused with Brooklyn.
Okay, and then this is Pam in Brookland. What's in Brookland? Catholic. Catholic is in Brookland. Come on.
You didn't sound very excited about your neighborhood.
We have a school.
Catholic
School?
University.
Oh.
Catholic We won't make this religious. It's a school.
I'm the Catholic.
Okay.
True.
All right, so we got some more closures here. So now this guy here is a black box, right? That is a closure. This guy here is a black box. It is a closure, right?
So can non not see into Shaw?
I can hear.
Oh, here we go. We're already asking the great questions. Okay, so yes, inside of, so this is the scope of Washington. This is the scope of Brookland, and this is the scope of Shaw. Okay, so yeah, Non is inside of Washington. Can she see Big Bear? You can.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
But if it's a closure
This thing
and
here is a
nothing
closure.
can see in a closure, she can't see.
You can't. You're in Washington as a whole. You're not in Shaw. You can't look from wherever you are in Washington and just see into Shaw. Shaw is a specific closure in here. Every time we've got a closure is a black box. Nothing can see inside of it. Inside of it, you can see out, because is Shaw a part of Washington? So therefore, should Steve and Shaw be aware of what's going on inside of Washington? Yes.
Oh,
And then,
so Steve can see out to Washington, but he can't see into Brooklyn. Right?
yeah, so Steve can see out to Washington, and Pam can see out to Washington. However, Steve cannot see into Brookland because he's inside of this little closure here. That's a separate closure. So this is the idea of closure, scope, and then scope chains. So a closure is the black box. Nothing outside of the black box can see into the black box. Within the black box, we've got scope. Scope is where all of the stuff is defined inside of the closure. So like all of the variables, all the functions, all of the members that are making up stuff. So we would say a closure opens up a new scope, and a scope can go and contain all kinds of data inside of it. So each time we have a closure, it opens a new scope for that closure. Inside of a closure, inside of a scope, scopes can always see upwards, up the chain. Nothing can see downwards on the chain. So Pam can see what's going on in Washington, and she can see what's going on way up here, which we would call global. Global being the catch-all. At some point, you got to hit the top of the chain. You can't go any higher. Where in the world is Kat? Great, Kat is off traveling the planet. She's global. So Pam can see Brookland, Pam can see Washington, Pam can see global. She is looking outward. However, Kat can't even see into Washington because she's not here. Non is in Washington in general, but she can't necessarily see into Brookland because she's not specifically there in that neighborhood. Is this helping? Okay, so this is scope, this is closure. This is something that's really confusing about JavaScript by comparison to something like Ruby, which Ruby, there's a method, and a method has the stuff that it's got. It's got nothing else unless you pass something into it.
So basically, you're saying like if this can't see into here, right?
Right, so non,
I can't see into there.
non, you're within Washington, and then Shaw is a closure within Washington.
So in terms of like actual JavaScript code, like what's the importance of that? Like that if you can't call a function or it won't recognize this function or something?
Well, we're going to be looking at that with code examples going through here. But for the time being, what's a closure? Steve.
How would I define closure? just a block that defines scope and visibility.
Yep, it is a black box. Nothing can see inside of it.
Right.
Jose, what is scope then? So closure is the black box. What is scope?
Scope is the set of things that you can access or use. Like
Yep.
variables, functions.
Variables, functions, it's all the data stored inside of the closure. So scope is the collection of data stored inside of the closure. And then, what is a scope chain, Kat?
It's like this is inside of another scope.
Right, so this thing here is a scope that exists within the greater scope of Washington, that exists within this greater scope of global. Technically, all of this is global. Scope global. And so what we'd say the scope chain is then is that Pam has access to her specific data inside of her closure, and she can go and look up the scope chain to the next higher scope and the next higher scope. So Pam can always look up the scope chain. Nothing can look down the scope chain. Nothing can look inside of the closure. Closures can look outward.
So what's like the reason for having a closure?
Okay, so this gets back to that IIFE thing, the immediately invoking function expression.
Oh, okay.
Why is global scope bad?
Because you can override a number of things.
Yeah, because global scope becomes this giant dumping ground. There's this one global place where everybody in the world is throwing JavaScript into this space. So let's say just you write Kat, you're writing an application. What's the application?
Cookies.
You're writing a cookies application.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's a piece of data that your cookies application defines? Var oven, cookie oven. Cookie oven equals true. I don't know. I got nothing. So anyways, this is Kat's application. Kat's code. What else does your cookie application use?
Baking sheet.
Baking sheet. Okay, baking sheet equals true. All right. What else does your thing use?
Chocolate chips.
Okay.
I assume.
Var chocolate chips equals true. Okay, so who else is building a, let's say we've also got Walter White's code. Okay, and so Walter White, when he builds his meth app, he disguises, he also uses a cookie oven, right? Cookie oven equals true. He uses var chemicals equals true. And he also uses baking sheets. Var baking sheets equals true. Okay, so Kat and Walter White are both writing applications, and let's say that, let's give you the benefit of the doubt, you're not loading Walter White's app onto your site. Walter White is loading your cookie app onto his website. And he's going to be really angry if your code comes onto his website and breaks his website, right?
You shouldn't be doing illegal.
This is against it. You don't want to piss off Walter White, right? This is a problem. Okay, so right now, if we were to go and combine both of these applications on the same page, we've got some problems, right? Because you're defining cookie sheet, cookie oven, and baking sheet, and so is he. And so these two apps would run head on into one another, have a train wreck, and nobody's code would work, which is not good for anyone. So this is what scope is about. If we could go and just put function Kat's app. So let's say we take all of your code and we drop it into function. Then we say function Walter's app, put that into a function. So now each of these guys are, this is what we call encapsulation. These apps have been encapsulated inside of a function, and by rules of scoping and closure, we know that each of these is going to be its own private scope that it defines, and so they shouldn't conflict with one another now, right? Now we've got a problem though. Does cat's app actually run? This is just a function. A function is a block of code. So right now, while we've defined your app inside of a function, it hasn't actually been executed, right? Same thing with Walters. So how would we make these two applications actually run and start up? So yeah, we could run Walter's app, and we could run Cat's app to actually fire the things off, make them do their thing. Instead of doing this, the common shortcut is letting the apps launch themselves. So this is that IIFE thing. So the apps just go, it's a function, it calls itself. That's all there is to it. So instead of us running the thing later on, we're saying, okay, this thing here is going to go and set up a private scope for our application to exist within, and then we're just going to have this function call itself to go and kick off all of this code, spit it out.
Why the extra parentheses at the
Yeah,
beginning?
why is parentheses in the beginning and then the 2 at the end?
This is something that's just conventional of doing this. You group your function. I think there was problems on older browsers. Traditionally, the things are written like this. So this is what you would see the things as. So cat's app.
Maybe it's also an anonymous function.
Yeah, so they just use an anonymous function. Anonymous function wraps the thing, and then it just calls itself at the end.
Oh, that's why it has a 2 at the end.
Yeah, so this is the parentheses wrapper is just grouping the function as a piece of data, and then the 2 at the end is actually saying, okay, now run this block. Cool? So that's what ifs are doing. And ifs, this is what we call the immediately invoking function expression. And so yeah, ifs are just a way that we can go and set up our own private block of code in which we can go and write our own variables and data and not have it conflict with somebody else in global scope. As a rule of thumb, we always want to go and minimize our dependency on global scope and put as little up in global as possible, because as soon as you go to global, you're subject to overwriting things inside of the browser or conflicting with other third-party pieces of software that are out there. And then this is probably the biggest difference between Node JavaScript and browser JavaScript, in that Node kind of redefined the way global scope works. It actually fixes global in Node to work the way you would actually expect it to, as opposed to one giant dumping ground that the browser has. Browser is fairly terrible for global scope. Okay. That done, let's restart on our code examples here, and we should be able to make a lot more sense of them. Scott, was that helpful? Even though
It was helpful.
Going on
Yes.
the whiteboard.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so let's set up each of these examples. We're just going to do inside of an IFE so that we can go and give it its own private scope to work in. So variable scoping. So var n equals 5. Function test. Var n equals 10. Console.log n. Then let's call test and console.log n. Okay, what should we get out of here? Let's also do console.log variable scoping. Give ourselves a little banner in the console. Okay, so variable scoping. We got 10 the first time, 5 the second time. What's going on?
Shadowing.
So when we run test is run on line 121. Jose, test runs. What is the value of n right here?
10.
Why is it 10?
It's the closest scope.
Right. So this is a naming conflict between scopes. So the outer scope, our outer iffy here, is defining something called n, and it's 5. Our inner function here is defining the same variable with the same name, and it's 10. If we go and we look at what it is inside of this inner closure, it is 10. It's the local variable. What should it be out here, Kat? What should n be in this outer scope? You think 10? Look back at our closure rules. So data that exists within inside of a closure is only within its closure.
So it should be 5.
Yeah, so this,
10? Oh, okay, got it.
okay, so let's run this, and yes, variable scoping, the first one, let's actually put inner and outer. Okay, so inside there, we're getting 10, and then outside here, it's still 5. So the reason being this n variable has been declared in both of these scopes, and so
Because RN5 can't see into that function.
right.
Right?
So n has been redeclared inside of the inner function. It's maintaining its own value for n. Incidentally, we can't reference the outer n here because we've overridden that variable name. However, since we've declared it inside of this inner scope, we're not affecting the outer one. It's still maintaining its value of 5.
So let's say bar n was 8 and it's outside of this function, right? Like if we did this out here.
Yeah, so the question here is, what if we did var n equals 25 out here? Yeah, so what's that going to do to the whole situation? Should it change anything?
It won't change anything inside of the function, right?
We should get the exact same results because we've got a wrapper function which is declaring n as 5, an inner function which is declaring n as 10. Each of these things are going to be using their local declarations, and so they won't be looking up the scope chain because there's a local declaration of n. Okay? Questions, anybody? Scott?
Nope.
Okay. Cool. So
What does it happen with stuff that is referenced instead of assigned, like arrays are objects? Because they are referenced, right?
it shouldn't matter. It doesn't matter what the data type is, whether it's a pointer reference or a value reference. Yeah, it's still the same thing. Okay, let's go on to scope chain. So let's set up a iffy to go and wrap our example here. Okay, and we'll do var n equals 5. We'll do function, let's call these inner. Our inner function. Okay, inner function, let's say n equals 10. Let's do console.log n here. And then let's do run inner, invoke it, and then console.log n again. And let's put a banner up top here, console.log scope chain. Okay, so what should we get out of this one? The first thing that prints out, Jose, what should it be on line?
It's 5, 10, 5? No, wait.
So we're looking at line 136. What should this print out?
10.
Yep, okay. And then Steve, what should line 140 print out?
5.
5. So similar to above here. Let's run it. Okay, something is different.
Oh, because we didn't do a var n equals 10. We took the existing var and then redefined it.
Okay, so this is why the var declaration is so incredibly important. So we've talked about var is the way that we declare things, similar to like function name is a declaration, var name is a declaration. Declarations are incredibly important. Declarations say what scope this thing is declared in, and then subsequent references to that thing just go up the scope chain. So in this case here, we're not, like above here, we did 2 declarations. We declared n in both the outer scope and the inner scope. In this case here, we're only declaring n in the outer scope. Then the inner scope runs.
You're overriding it.
Yep, so when n is set right here, when n is assigned, it's assigning up the scope chain. It says, well, n isn't actually declared here in the inner scope. So I'm just going to go up the scope chain to find where n was actually declared, and then I'll reset it there. So in this case, the inner scope, n overrides with 10. So in the inner scope, it's 10, and then when we get down here to line 140 in the outer scope, it's still 10 because it was affected in the outer scope. So really, really important. Where a variable is defined or where a function is defined declares where it's handled inside of the scope chain.
That's a gotcha. I probably would do that wrong many times.
Well, this is, the thing is with scoping rules, no, the thing that's weird about that, Steve, is that these things aren't, once you go and you get the simple rules, it's actually an incredibly simple language. Like these are, we're doing the skeleton rules here, and after the skeleton rules are addressed, like there's nothing to the language. It's just you follow the rules and it works like this, and then
Language, you know.
yeah. So we're just doing the skeleton rules. Okay, so any questions on scope chain? Okay, let's talk about little scope. Okay, let's set up a iffy to wrap our little example here in. And let's say function inner. We'll say n equals 10. Oh, n equals 15 this time. Let's call inner. And then console.log out n.
Can you scroll up a bit?
Yeah, sorry. Okay, so what is going to happen here?
In my head, that should work,
Okay,
but I'm sure it will.
It'll just be 15.
we're not even logging it out in the inner, so we're just logging it in the outer. So let's run it. Yep, okay, it's 15. Hang on. This is global. Local.
I like
Global.
the idea of local scope.
Okay, so this is. Okay, so yeah, we go and we just set n. N isn't even declared this time around, right? Let's even make it a new variable name. Undeclared variable name. Make this really obvious. Okay, so we're setting an undeclared variable. Undeclared being, why is this undeclared cat? Why would we say this is undeclared? What's missing that we would need to declare it? Right, so that's a declaration. var is our declaration. In this case, we're saying this is undeclared because we're just referencing this variable without ever having a var in front of it. Okay, so our undeclared variable is, as we would expect it to be, 15 down here. However, let's go out here, console.log undeclared variable name is also 15. What happened?
Oh, since you didn't declare it, it just gets to the global.
Right. So what ends up happening here? This seems like it's going against scoping rules, right? Because now undeclared variable, we're outside of a bunch of these closures, and yet this thing way out here can still see this variable that was declared way in here. So what happened? The deal with an undeclared variable. Undeclared variables are very evil for a lot of reasons. The big one being that when we don't declare the variable and we just assign it, JavaScript's going to go and say, okay, is this variable declared here in this current scope? Nope, it's not. I'm going to look up the scope chain. Okay, is it declared in this scope? Nope, it's not. Okay, I'm going to look up the scope chain. And it just keeps going up the scope chain until it can't go any further and it hits global scope and it says, well, I can't go any higher, so I'm just going to go and I need to go and set this thing, so I'm just going to sign up here in global. So
instead of throwing an error, it was saying to do.
Yeah, I mean the thing is,
I would expect like an undeclared variable to tell me like, hey, it's not happening.
I believe strict mode actually does that. So if you do use strict, I believe that will throw an error. Yeah. So that's what strict mode does.
What if you were to put it above the function?
Hmm?
Console log under the global one. If you were to put it.
That's still subject to control flow, so it wouldn't exist up here because we still haven't actually declared this variable until we run the inner function. So we've got to run this thing, and then that is going to be the thing that says, okay, I'm going to try to set this, doesn't work here, doesn't work here, and then it sets it out in global. So, long story short, we shouldn't be relying on use strict, Jose. It's a nicety, but we should just get in the habit of declaring our variables and doing it right to begin with.
Okay, but is there anything wrong with using use?
No. Only with older browsers it caused problems because it would actually change the runtime, and it's not that big of a deal nowadays.
Stop worrying about older browsers.
Okay, so questions about this. Jose, if I assign a variable without declaring it, where does it go?
Global.
Global scope. Kat, why is that bad?
Because then it just like assigns it somewhere.
Yep, just assigns it randomly out someplace. One of my favorite ones, people go and do for loops. So like for I equals 0, I is less than something, and then I plus plus, right? We see this all the time. The proper way to do a for loop would be a var I. It's kind of hysterical to go onto websites, go into the JavaScript console and say, is I defined here? And you would be amazed at how many websites have I defined in global scope because somebody forgot the var declaration someplace.
That for loop would probably look more familiar if you guys did like old school like C programming or something.
We did for loops
You guys
yesterday.
did some for loops, isn't it?
Yeah, we did all the. For loop is still the go-to bread and butter in JavaScript.
Oh God.
How is it in C?
Hmm?
Is it similar?
Yeah, it's almost exactly the
They don't
same.
have any fancy iterators, or but underscore does something like that or something. That's
Yeah,
just somebody that gives you something fancy.
They do that's the declarative versus imperative, and so like declarative programming is great, but imperative is faster. It's a lot simpler in a lot of ways conceptually because you actually understand what it's doing as opposed to relying on something to do it. Also in JavaScript, you got to worry about scope because scope would change inside of the function.
Now, let's question about scope. Does like for create a scope too? Does like for loop create a scope too?
No, for loop does not create scope. The only thing that creates scope in JavaScript, I should say, the only thing that creates closure is a function. So that's the only thing that has. We've got function scope.
Okay, so if I have an I declared in the scope and use it in the for loop, to change that value.
If it's declared at the scope level, yeah. Or yes, I'm sorry. Anywhere inside of the scope, if you use I, it would set it inside of the entire
If I
scope.
use a var inside a for loop, it is available for the scope that it is.
For the function scope, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm looking at this like it looks like if you wanted to get that kind of functionality, you would have to like you would essentially have to wrap like an array of items in a new like object, which you could then call methods on it if you wanted to get that sort of Ruby type behavior where you're like first, next.
For
Like if you wanted to be able to get some of those like sort of like that syntactic like sugar of like saying like give me the first element next like at each, you'd have to wrap like you would have to do like an object that would wrap whatever like collection you had, and then you would be able to like,
and you call methods on the object.
yeah, which
Those
was
things.
even nastier than just doing a for loop.
Yeah, for loops are. People scoff at them, but the things are unbelievably simple and they don't have any weird scoping rules. And so there's actually a lot of advantages. They're crazy fast too, by comparison to you go and you do the function iterators and it's got to set up a new scope each time. It's slower to go and do it that way. So I don't know. The old school stuff is still incredibly simple to explain and incredibly fast to run. So there's a lot of merit in doing it that way. Okay. Questions on any of this stuff? So then what was the iffy? We're now down here. So what was this thing doing? This was the original example that we aborted on. So my code here. So right, when we write code, just wrap it in iffy, and that goes and gives us our own scope to be going and writing our functions and variables inside of that won't conflict with anybody else. Okay.
And that's a common pattern if you want to just like limit the scope of whatever you're putting in that block and execute it immediately.
So yeah, it's a very common pattern for. It's the standard for I want to go and declare my own application space. And then there's variations of the pattern, like the UMD pattern and stuff that you'll see in a lot of libraries nowadays, where it's kind of setting up a closure that's going to run this thing, and it runs it for AMD or Node or browser. And it's all just fancy versions of this concept of I'm setting up a package that goes and encapsulates my scope.
You call it the UMD.
UMD is the a proper like universal module definition. Okay, let's just take 5 minutes here. Break, clear your head. The next one is probably the hardest, and I don't know. I enjoy doing it. And I'm gonna grab some coffee, hit the restroom. So we're gonna do contextual invocation next.
You guys feeling the power of JavaScript?
No.
Power scopes?
Isn't it awesome? Oh.
Think about like you won't have to like get some developer to make all your cool ideas happen.
They all involve CSS and Sass. I don't know.
But you can now. JavaScript would be faster when you want to do like dynamic stuff, animation and stuff.
Is Cutworth on the red line? That's it.
It's green and yellow.
That's it.
Living in apartments.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're trying to look at like townhouses we can live in. I thought you just got a new place a few months ago.
I've been
Was that
space
last
for
year?
like 3 years.
I guess we just worked together a long time. I thought you lived like in Arlington for a while,
I do.
then you moved into DC.
No, I live in Arlington. I'm moving.
Oh.
A break.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for people to trickle back in. Okay. Nan, what was the difference between a declaration and an assignment?
Declaration is just pointing out and referencing a function, right? And then an assignment is assigning something a variable and then passing the function and calling it.
Yep. So a declaration is the method is declared and then it's universally available, versus an assignment is a function that's just set to a variable and then it's only available after it's been set, after it's been assigned. Cool. Let's see. Steve, where does a variable go when it's referenced without, or it's assigned without being declared?
It's in a global scope.
Cool. And then,
Bad.
yeah, which is bad. Then Jose, where is when I assign a variable that's declared up higher, where does it go? Or I should say, when I assign a variable, where is it set?
If it's set on the scope, it was declared,
Yes.
unless it was not declared.
Perfect. Perfect. When I assign a variable, it is set in the scope in which the variable was declared. Awesome. Great answer. Cool. How are we feeling about this? Good.
Not completely.
Awesome. That's a great start. Okay, I always think this is the one that people struggle with the most on picking up. It's kind of the most mind-bendery one. And then after this, prototypal inheritance is probably the most advanced subject, but I actually think it's easier than contextual invocation. So contextual invocation, anybody ever used the keyword this in JavaScript?
I did
Yeah?
once.
Have any idea what it referenced?
I think I was using it to reference what I was clicking on or something like that. Like I wanted it. Yeah.
I got really confused with this.
Yeah, this, there's no two ways about it.
Like, I knew I
Why
had to
in
use
general?
this, but I didn't know why I had to use this.
Yes.
And doesn't this mean something different in Java? I mean, on jQuery than it.
It means something different everywhere. It's contextual. So this is this reference that we have available inside of functions. And the meaning of this changes depending on how the function was actually invoked, which this is the thing that makes JavaScript unbelievably powerful and also unbelievably confusing. And this is the thing that people always get hung up on, like why the hell does this happen? Actually, it makes a lot of sense, especially when you go and you look at prototypal inheritance. All of a sudden, this makes a whole lot more sense. But it doesn't change the fact that this is no. Yeah. Tell you what, I'll talk to you at the end of the day, and
You
we'll
want to show it. You don't have to take it.
yeah,
You'll find
I'll
out.
show you at the end of the day.
Show me the code.
Okay, so let's go in. Contextual invocation. I always start out with this example. So I'm a function. I am a high five function. That is my job. I high five. Okay? So I'm the function. I'm going to high five.
That's what I need.
Well, what am I
Someone
missing?
to high
What-
five.
I need someone to high five. I need somebody to
You
high
can't
five.
yourself.
I can't high five myself. I'm just hanging.
That's called clapping.
Okay, so I need somebody to high five. Okay, if we were to say, what was the object that I just high fived?
My hand.
His hand.
Let's
Jose.
just,
It's-
Jose. Jose was the object I high fived.
Oh,
Okay, I'm still the same function. High five. Okay, I just high fived non. What was the context of this high five? What was the contextual object that I operated on?
Nah.
Non. Right. I am one function, and I just operated on Jose and high fived him. I then went over and I high fived non, and I operated on non. So this is the idea of a function is just a thing that can go and run on anything. The deal with a function is always bound to another object. It always has to run on some other object in the system. When we invoke a function, the function has to bind to an object on which it operates. So this is the idea of context. Context is the thing that the function attaches to an object, and it's going to operate on this object. And then the way we invoke the function is going to change the context or the object that we're actually operating on. So that's what we're going to be looking at in the next scenarios. And there are 4 ways to invoke a function. And depending on the way you invoke the function, the context, the object the function is bound to and operating upon is going to change. Okay? So 3.1, let's start out with the really easy one. This is function invocation. And example function name called. Classic. Function go boom. Okay, and let's console.log this, and then let's do go boom. Okay, so this is always referencing the object that this function is bound to when it's running. Okay, so think about the high five example there. I am a function, I need an object to go and operate on. I can't operate on myself. Like, I need some kind of context. So the first time I high-fived Jose, Jose was my context. It was the object I was operating on. Went over to non, that's the object I'm operating on. This always references the function's bound object that it's operating upon at this current time. So in this case here, we've set up a function, and we're just console logging out this keyword, and we're going to see what it spits out, and we're just calling it. We're just invoking this function. So let's see. What are we going to get? Let's actually do a console.log. Yep, I'm missing an E. And let's just log out the header here for ourselves. Okay. Window. So function invocation, we just ran this thing and my function bound itself to window. Any idea what window? Yeah, it's the most top level thing. Window is like the overarching thing. It's the thing that contains everything in JavaScript in the browser. What else would we call window?
Global.
Global, right. So when we just go and we take any old plain function.
It's like having a ghost you can always high five with when no one else is available.
Yeah, like I need something, and so
Windows always around.
Yeah, there's always some global thing that when all else fails, if you don't give me something specific to operate on, well, hell, screw it. I'm just going to go up and I'm going to high five global scope. So global is like this, again, kind of catch-all default that we can go and just, whenever something runs, we just use global as kind of the catch-all. If I need something to invoke in the context of, I'm going to invoke in the context of global scope.
So is window just, it just happens to be global in a browser context? Is there a different global, like if I was in like Node.js or?
Yeah,
whatever?
so
Okay.
in Node.js, there's no concept of window because it's not a browser.
Yeah.
So there's actually a global object in Node. Node and they're very, like, it's still JavaScript in both places. There's just slight differences where something like that is adopted and kind of works the same but different in Node. But they're very, very synonymous. Like, you just think of the global object in Node as being synonymous to the window object in a browser, and like, so they map one-to-one. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward, right? So whenever we just invoke a function without any kind of special reference, it's going to just run in the context of global scope. That also means that we would have, we'll circle back on that. Okay, what else can we do for invocation? Let's do console.log, and I think we're gonna do call invocation next. So we said we use the word invoke as a generic way to go and describe executing a function, that's because there's this very specific thing called call that we can do to a function, which we'll use right now. So let's do a var xwing and make it just some random object. And let's do function go boom. We're just going to redeclare go boom. This probably should be in its own enclosure. Okay, then I'm going to do go boom dot call. Okay, so we talked about how a function is just a piece of data. And remember how like we were looking at methods? Kat, what was a method of a string that we looked at yesterday? Like we talked about a string object and we could call methods on the object, invoke methods on the object and have it do things. Yeah, length was a property that we accessed. We also did things like uppercase, downcase. Like those were methods of this string that we could go and say, hey, go and string, do this thing for me, and it would run this operation. A function is just like that, and it's got this method on it called call. And so using the call method, we can go and reference the function and tell the function to call itself, and then we can just hand it some random object. Whose X-Wing is this? Name, this will be Luke's X-Wing, so that we can recognize it. Okay, so if we run this guy, call invocation. Context, the keyword this is referring to our X-Wing object. Why? Jose?
Sorry.
Tell us why.
Because you're calling that function over the X-Wing object.
Yep. So what we're doing is we're taking the function, we're referencing it, we're saying, hey, call yourself, and when you run, invoke yourself in the context, bind to this object that I'm going to hand you, and I'm handing you this random object that I built up here. So this is really cool. This is the idea, like, and one of the reasons why JavaScript is really well aligned for the browser is this idea that we can go and take a single function, build it once, and then just have thousands of objects that we use this one function to go and operate upon. Versus like in other languages, if it was a one-to-one mapping where we're going to build this chunk of code for each one of these objects, it just takes up a whole lot of memory and your application kind of bloats up. This is a very lightweight and efficient way to have, I have one of these things and it operates on thousands of other things, as opposed to
put it like inside the object.
Reference it to anything.
yeah, so this thing here, like,
So you could do go, like, let's say you had like 3 other variables. You could do go boom call variable, like
Sure.
Y-wing or something.
Sure, let's make a Y-wing equals, who's the pilot of the Y-wing?
Jose.
Thumbs up for
Jose is the pilot of the Y-wing.
why? They always die. There's not a single one
Yeah,
that makes out of
sometimes.
it.
Okay,
Oh, I win.
I'll be the pilot of the Y-wing if you don't want to die.
Cat. Okay.
Space.
No, let's just make it a different spaceship. We're gonna, what's an Enterprise?
But now you're mixing stuff. Star Wars.
No, make it
Okay.
The
TIE Fighter.
Fine.
Is that better?
That's life is not worth mixing up.
Okay, so now we're going to go boom twice, and that one function is going to operate in context of these other things. What if we wanted to replicate just kind of this anonymous call, this function invocation we did earlier? That would look like, you know, under the hood, JavaScript is really just doing go boom dot call window would be the default implementation here. So like,
So if you didn't put window in there, would it just?
hey, that's a great question. What if we just did call by itself?
Here, right?
No, it fills in with window.
That's how it defaults to window.
Yeah, so basically,
Those type of things that-
no, this is brilliant because what this thing is, basically, this thing is a shorthand for dot call.
Okay.
And so if you don't give it anything, it says, I'm just going to use window as the default. Okay, so that's the call invocation. Make sense?
There's no point.
What's that?
I was going to ask if you can pass arguments on the dot call.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it doesn't make sense.
You can.
I can give it this.
Yeah, what should we give it? Laser Blast.
Yes.
And then this one was by Cannon Fire. And then Go Boom could then accept an argument of method of destruction. And then let's log out this and its method of destruction. So yeah, we can totally pass in arguments. So we can call with arguments. There's a different flavor of the call method called apply, which is almost the exact same thing. It just takes an array instead of a standard list. So call and apply are very, very similar. You can look up apply. Okay, questions on call?
I'm wondering why mine isn't working.
Why yours isn't working?
This one.
Oh, you've got to actually receive the argument up here. So these things are being passed as arguments to the Go Boom method.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the Go Boom method needs to actually receive method of destruction as an argument.
Mm-hmm.
So now this value here is getting passed into this argument, and then we could go and print out that value. So this is what I was doing.
Oh, okay.
So it says we're passing this in, we're receiving it as argument, and then we're console logging
So
out.
this is still just referencing anything else that it's calling.
This is just referencing the object that this function is bound to,
Okay.
that it's running upon.
Okay.
So that when you call with no arguments, would the behavior be different in strict mode?
I don't think so. No, it's not. Like that's totally valid to go and call the thing without, and just it goes up to window.
Okay.
It's a default behavior of JavaScript that if something is called without a target, it just operates on global scope, and that's fine. Like you need something as a catch-all because you don't always want to go and bind to a specific thing that you're working with. So it's good to have a catch-all. What if we wanted to, in our console log right here, Go Boom, let's say console.log, how could I log out the name of the object that was targeted? The name of the object that's going boom. Thoughts? We can reference the object that's currently being invoked upon using this, right? So if we wanted to go and get the name of that object, anybody remember the syntax for referencing a member of an object?
Object dot something?
Yeah, dot, and then what property do we want to reference?
Name.
Yeah, so log out this dot name for me. Yep, so it's going and it's logging out Luke and Cat. So this is a really useful thing. Like this method is just going to bind to an object, and then we can read properties of this object and use them in the implementation of this method. And then when we change the object out, we just change all the data that's being used inside of this method. Kat, that makes sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's a little bit to wrap your head around. Practical application goes a long way. So as you use
any
this.
way that you could call, like, have it print out X-Wing or TIE Fighter? Or no?
No, the names of the variables are just programmatic references. They're just labels that the program uses to map something. They're not actually a hard name that's a property of the object.
Okay.
So, no. Okay, so moving on. You guys are tearing through this. That's great. Console.log. Let's do method invocation. Okay, I think this one we build a Death Star on. Yes. Okay, so var Death Star equals an object. And remember how we can go and attach functions onto objects and store a function within a data structure? So let's just store a Go Boom function on this object. Okay. So now I'm going to do deathstar.go boom. What should this method be bound to? Or what should this function be bound to? What object is this going to operate on?
Should that start?
Yep, it's going to operate on deathstar. Let's give it a name. So this is tricky. This is the idea that a function can be a member of an object. It can be just stored within an object data structure. If we go and we reference and invoke the function through the object itself that it's attached to, it is smart enough to know that I'm just going to invoke myself on the method that is hosting me, that I'm being called through. So it's actually keeping track of the fact that we're referencing this object and then we're referencing a function of it. We would say this is a method of the object. So method being something that is a behavior of this object here. This is a lot like, we think about string. So if we think about what string looks like under the hood, var string equals, it's an object. What are some methods of a string that we were talking about?
Uppercase.
Yeah, to uppercase was a method of a string. What else was let's see, we had a to lowercase was a method of a string. So, in the deep bowels of JavaScript someplace, we've got a string that then we're saying dot, to uppercase. And then JavaScript is smart enough to go and say, hey, this method is operating on this object that it's attached to. So, like objects, the primitive objects are doing the same thing. We're just adding methods that we can go and invoke on an object itself. Questions? Kat?
I don't think
Ask me good questions and I'll try to give mediocre answers that explain. And everybody learns from it. If something's not clicking, try to express it, because it helps everybody. If you can.
So in this instance, the method is the function that we wrote?
Yep.
Okay.
It's still a function.
Yeah.
We just refer to it by this special name of method when the thing is actually attached to an object. Because then we're going to be calling the thing as part of this object, and it's going to be acting specifically on this one object. So therefore, the distinction between function and method is a function is just a function object that's floating around inside of our JavaScript application. A method is a function that has been attached specifically to an object and is going to operate on this one object. It's kind of a nuanced distinction, but it's one that's made. Cool. Any other questions? Does this actually make sense? We churned through this. This is the hard stuff right here.
I mean, it makes sense in theory. Actually, applying it's probably a different matter.
Okay, so why don't we go into the repo and do the...
But did we do this constructor?
we're going to do that this afternoon as part of prototype. So there are 4 methods. We've only looked at 3, but the 4th method is kind of just hand in hand with prototype. It doesn't make sense out of context of prototype. So let's do, we've got about 45 minutes till lunch. Why don't you guys, Non and Kat, why don't you guys pair up? Maybe Pam will jump in with you guys. And let's go and do exercises, lesson practice, and let's do this .html. Where did my folder go? Yep, if you go to this.html, so if you,
In exercises?
I don't see it in exercise. Lesson practice. This.
okay, so on this guy, you can see there's a big script file here, and it's taking a whole bunch of methods and it's just calling them in different ways with different objects. So on this one, just go through one at a time. You can see the outputs are numbered here, and just look at number one and look at what it's printing out in the console and try to think about why it's printing that out into the console. And if you got questions, by all means, call us over and we'll discuss why it's doing that. But the goal of this would be to just read down, look at each point in the code, like number 2, number 3, number 4, and just try to map in your brain, like, okay, why am I seeing this as the contextual this that's being logged out?
One of the issues I had with this is when we start like doing callbacks.
Callbacks almost always run anonymously. So
yeah,
they
so like I never
almost
know
al-
what this is like. Is it like referencing?
they almost always run in the context of global. Unless you pass context with it, then a
Yeah, like
callback
on
always.
event handlers. Usually get like the button click, right? Or guys-
Yes, event handlers are invoked in the context of the element that they were clicked. But even then, like, you don't necessarily need to worry about the this reference because you just use the event object. The event object gives you this description of what the original target was. Like, I don't use this in the context of that
Maybe
kind of
that
garbage.
was I was doing wrong.
Console log, so
So
this.
what's the
I think it's way more obvious to
This
use
one is
event
console
data.
logging
what is
the
the thing?
string one.
Yeah.
So this is
And console log this,
exercises,
log the
functions,
window, right?
lesson,
Because that's the
Because there's nothing.
lesson
And
exercises,
we assign
What
variable
one?
color.
lesson practice, and then
We'll print that out.
this.html.
So the
So if you
function
opened
same
up, there's all these little
colors.
numbered outputs down here.
It's on the window again.
And so the goal is to go and look at
Has nothing in it yet.
Yeah.
each number and look at what it's printing out and map that to the console and just try to
Okay,
think about the mental mapping of why it's putting that out in each of those. You and Steve can work together if you want to.
Inside of like team ups.
Yeah, it did window green. But
They
then
run terminal in
Wait,
different
but why
windows.
is
But
two?
then
that's
this
what
is
I'm
just
trying
like
to
in the
figure out.
terminal.
Because
Right.
3 is also below.
Oh, because this is
So
just
this
a
is
function.
like
We're not we
bounce
didn't
around
call it yet.
Oh, and then it calls it here.
So it calls
So like
this, and then it says call
them running inside
same
of
color.
team
So that's when it
Yeah.
says window, right?
kind of doing the best.
That's when it logs the window.
Yeah.
This is when it says the color.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And then you're going to want to
Right.
open up the HTML file too, which has got the JavaScript in it.
Variable. So this is an object.
And
The
then,
apple
yeah.
variable is an object.
This is Windows.
And it's saying the one thing inside of it is the color, and it's red. So this console logs 3, and then this goes back up to say color, which is that function. It's gonna call apple. So then it logs this, which is still the Oh, which is- It's still the window. Oh, it's object. Oh, because you're calling apple. So it's saying, okay, console log this. This is an object, right? And then it's gonna, what's that color? And it's red, right?
Save my cover.
Because this is this, when you do this, inside an object, that's a variable, right?
This is a property of this object. So we could reference, if we've got a handle on this object, we could reference this dot color to go and read its color off of it.
But this is the variable, right? It's green.
So var
So
color
why
is
is it-
green, and then we say color, and
Yeah.
so what context is this being invoked in?
This logs the window.
Yep.
And,
And
then
then-
this logs the color, which is green.
Yeah,
Or
so,
the string is green.
well, what scope is color defined in?
Global.
Yeah, so this thing here is global, and then this dot color is saying global scope, the color in global scope, which is getting you this variable reference.
Okay. So we're just confused about this part right here.
Mhm.
So this isn't global, right?
Yep.
So it console logs the string 3.
Yep.
And then you're going back up to say color.
No, we're saying, in this case here, we're saying we're referencing this function. This is
Yes.
a reference to this function. So we're just referencing say color, and we're saying call in context of this apple object. So
Okay.
what is this when we call in context of the apple?
It's an object.
So what is this, though? What object is it? So what object is actually being,
Apple.
yeah, so this apple object right here, this object is the this in that context.
Yeah.
And therefore,
So if you
what's this dot color?
wrote it out instead of being console.log this, it would be console.log apple.
So we're like confused about this part, like how it got red.
Right, so apple is an object that has a color property on it.
Mhm.
And so then when we take this function and we call it in context of this object, this is referencing this object, and then this dot color is saying the color of this object that I'm currently working on.
Because that could be a property. It's calling the property, right?
Yeah, it's reading the property of
But when
that
it's
object.
when it was referencing this, it's reading the variable.
Effectively, a variable is a property of the scope that it's in.
Okay.
And so this
That's
thing
what I was
here is
confused
a
about.
property of global scope now.
Okay.
So yeah, we can reference window.color to go and read color off of the window.
So like, if this was name and we put name there, and this was name, it would do the same thing.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Moving on. Okay, so bananas goes yellow. So this is semi-color. Is say color. Yeah. So that's going back to
Same
that.
to this.
So here,
Yes.
I would expect this to be
So we're just reassigning it.
a function
Yeah.
because it's the scope, right?
So then we
Or
can
This
Referencing
never
it.
references a
I don't
function
think you're
unless you
assigning
invoke it on
I
a
think
function
you're-
object,
Okay,
which
sorry.
there's no reason to do.
Okay,
No,
it's
so-
not an object.
How is it being invoked though?
So you're saying
Puppy.bark.
semi-color is
Yeah.
the
So
same thing.
This thing
Same
here,
color.
this is a
So we're-
method
but
of
we're
the
saying
puppy object.
banana
And so therefore when we're invoking it
Equals
through
the
puppy,
same
It would just
function
show-
as
That's-
semi-color.
So then we console log 4,
Let's see.
and then console log
See.
banana. So banana is the object. So it's after 4 object. And then console log 5. And then banana semi-color is say color. So this should reference the object again first.
this is a tricky one.
And then console log this color. This color is yellow.
In this case, so say color, this is a function. And then we're referencing it down here and we're assigning it as a member of banana. So now all of a sudden banana has a method attached to it, a function attached to it. It happens to be this thing right up here. That's now been attached as a member of banana. So when you invoke banana semi-color, it's actually just running this method
This, yeah.
as a method of
So
the
this
banana
could have,
object.
this could easily just be, right?
No, because we,
Because when you're reassigning it. So that could be that, right?
so semi-color is a property of banana, and it's using this method that we defined up here. And so in this case, this function is just getting reused in a whole lot of different places. And it's just
So
getting
it's
added as a,
basically saying, this.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yep, that's exactly what it's doing. Yep.
Okay. So if we're running this, then we're running this function right there.
Great, but you're invoking it in context of banana.
Yes.
So this, in this context, is referencing
Is
the banana
referencing-
object.
This right here.
Yep, and so
Okay.
you're going to get the color yellow off of the banana.
So when we log it, we log this, it would be the banana, the object.
Well, why is yellow after?
So it's saying what is the object, and then what is the color of the object.
So then,
Oh.
so it console logs 5, and then it says, hey, look at this.
So we're
Okay.
seeing banana print out, and then we're seeing the color of the
So
banana.
then it's
So
the
then-
object, and then it's yellow.
So then it's referencing back this, and then this
Yeah.
color is referencing
The
this.
Banana's
Yeah.
color.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, we're calling this here, and it's saying, hey, this is function that reference this variable.
This is, of course, contrived JavaScript. We wouldn't actually want to structure applications this way.
This right
Although
here.
you see all kinds of spaghetti like this in a lot of apps. So
Bar puppy is next, so we're
It's good to
just
be able to
assigning
read it.
this. So this is an object with the name, a bark function, and a say name function. And then the next one should be console log 6, right? And console log puppy, that's an object.
Yep.
And console log 7, and puppy bark. Puppy dot bark should show up this function, right?
It shows up as an object.
Did you click it?
this is the, yeah, Peter wrote this for the workshop.
Do bark, so
I always use starships in all of my exercises,
Right.
and then Peter just goes, hey,
Puppies.
random stuff, puppies and kittens that dress puppies, and like, well, you know what, you got the job done.
Right.
Good exercise.
So it's just calling puppy again.
it's calling puppy, but then it's also calling bark, the bark function.
Professional JavaScript
So
workshop
it calls
went
this
really, really
first,
well. Gee, we were
and
kind of
then-
amazed that people were writing what they were at the end of the whole.
Were they developers before?
We just had people on the
But
screen.
this is
all
an
day.
object. So
But
it's
yeah,
just
they were
calling
completing. I'm gonna give them Hogwarts JS after, or Gryffindor
The
House
object.
after lunch. And,
because the function
yeah, we had everybody complete.
right? Or is the
How was
I don't need
the
this
panel?
Oh, it was surprisingly good. It was amazing for being a two-person panel. It actually worked out great.
Yeah.
because
And I guess I thought it was for like hiring managers or something to come out and think about how they develop their
Yes.
team or something. It was in fact for just
Yes.
people who know
So,
nothing about
by
it. They're
calling-
looking to get into it.
Yeah.
Where do they start? Like,
So,
what's
sorry. So we're
the
calling
direction and how do you get into doing
But
this?
this, oh, that's
And so, yeah,
why.
it actually worked out well
That's
as a
why
two-person
it's
panel.
why.
And
That's
one
why
of my
it's the
view-
whole object
Oh,
because
do you meet Ben?
the bark
Ben had
function
the crazy,
Yeah.
is
crazy
console
app.
logging this
Does he have a job
variable.
yet?
He does
Right.
not.
Is it-
Does that
because
make
that's
sense?
that's like the
Trying to
root,
get him to play the
yeah.
box.
So
You
we're
should.
calling the bark function within
Yeah,
this
I've heard of that.
variable
right?
It
and
worked
saying
so
perform
hard.
this function,
Yeah.
and the
But,
function is
um,
console logging this, and this
Yeah,
is referring
so
to puppy.
We actually
Right,
had one
so that's
question
why
about
it's
like
spinning
how I've got this
the entire
giant
object.
vision for
Yeah.
my app and
Okay, that makes sense.
I don't even know what to do with it.
Again.
And then
So,
console log 8,
We actually had an empty chair up
and
front
then
that
console log
wasn't filled.
puppy
And
say
so I
name,
said,
so then it'll name.
Ben,
So then
would
it
you
should
mind
almost
just coming up here as long as you're in the audience?
right?
Like, if I was to answer this question, I would just
Very good.
repeat what Ben told me in the final presentation of how he went about
So then
this.
the next one should
And
be
you
console
guys
log
have the
9.
advantage of this guy is sitting here.
And
So
then
let's have
console
him come
log
up.
kitten, so that's
And it
an
was really good.
object.
Like Ben came
Mhm.
up and just
And then
he's so
console log 10.
humble.
I
And he's
know.
just so likable.
Yes,
And he
I know.
talks with this adorable British
We're
accent.
gonna call
Yes.
this little kitten
So,
function.
And
The
it's just
function's
made it a
console
little
log
bit
kitten, so
bigger
first it should
and
be an
it
object,
did this thing and then
Entire
repackaged
object.
it and then and it's great. So,
right?
yeah, it worked really well.
Yeah, this whole thing.
Have they started the guild? The Rugby Guild?
Yeah, that's
So this
kicking
whole
that one
thing.
off. I
Yeah.
think they're running.
And it might not be in the same order because
Yeah.
it doesn't always go in the
Yeah,
same
like
order.
good,
So then
good stuff.
first it console logs that, then we'll refer to introduce.
Were we supposed to get lunch again today?
Yeah.
Oh. They're coming at 12:30.
Oh no, referring to kitten.
Supposed to be.
So then kitten
introducing.
We already did this part,
Right.
but then friend, and then bark is up here. So console log this.
So it's console logging the fluffy and part function.
Why? It's calling this first. So then friend is plus bark.
So what's the context of? So when you get back here, what's the context?
So
Is it
it's
still
calling friend,
Yeah.
But friend
which is
is
puppy,
the name.
Right.
but it's also calling the bark function, which is all the way up here.
Yeah.
Oh wait, so friend. Oh, there's no tags here. So
Yeah.
friend is referring up to here. So it's calling this variable again.
Yeah, which
And
has
then-
these two in it, which is why
So
it
then
logs that.
it logs this, and all. And so it calls this function the puppy function. Right?
Yeah, which is why it logs it here.
Yeah. The puppy
Oh,
object.
so then it's object.
Yeah.
Okay. And then console log this, so it's referring to kitten and then friend. So then it should still be that.
Yeah.
So puppy. So just calling this object.
Again.
So this object is the same as this one. Oh, it's a little confusing.
Yeah, it does. You make it through it?
Yeah.
There's a scope one in there too. If you want to run through that. Scope is kind of doing a very similar thing with
Do this.
mapping scopes.
What is it?
This one's more just kind of a experimentation one.
The first function. So we're console logging, enter Washington. Yeah. Enter this one. And then this would just refer to global, right? Because we're not assigning a variable. Or just it won't
Oh, kitten friends
declare
the
a
puppy.
variable. So it's just gonna choose whatever and say. So then this function is within Washington. And then the next one should say entering neighborhood.
Yes,
And then we're gonna console mayor
which refers to
to
this.
right. So it's gonna say right.
Mhm.
And then population. So that'll just go to global. So in console is it 100?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And then this function is going to. So then the next one should be entering Eastern Market.
No, this is a separate one. Like this ends here.
No, but it's still within Washington.
No, Washington ended. Yeah,
Did it?
No, it didn't. This is here. Did you see look, this line? It's all the way to the
Oh,
bottom.
yeah. Okay. Sorry.
So the next one should be entering Eastern Market.
Mm.
Huh. Wait, this one should.
Y'all
Why
on
isn't
different
this
exercise?
showing?
Yeah, there's another one in there which is scope. It's the same kind of exercise, just working with
Why is it
scopes.
showing that?
So like, I feel like a lot of stuff kind of makes sense, like as you're executing it.
Why is it not
Um,
showing up?
Because it's commented out here.
Maybe you just get this.
Oh.
Maybe
So
it's
you're
like
not
most languages
So
where
we
you
don't
just
have any of this.
you
So
learn how
like
to
it's
code
there, but
read
you're
the
not
language by
calling it,
just
so
doing a
nothing's
lot of
happening
code
to
reading.
it, so it's not.
But how do you
Okay,
So if you
How do you
commented
get
that out, it would get loud.
so it
how do
would
you
then
get
it would,
good at
oh, cause navy yards being run here.
reading
Right.
sort of
So
like
it's referring to that.
complex
This
JavaScript
Okay,
like
So then-
code, like
okay, what one's the log
there's a lot
name?
of
So the next one
things encapsulated.
should
There's a lot of
be
Honestly,
This
knowing
is-
the rules, that's
Greg.
the best possible way you can do it. You just
We-
know the
we
got
mechanical
maybe
rules of the
maybe.
language,
Okay.
and
So
then
that's what-
knowing the
yeah.
mechanical rules, it's still hard.
Population 100.
Like,
Yeah.
I
And
hate
then
no
you get
JavaScript.
Washington. And then
Really,
it will-
yeah,
really.
JavaScript.
It
Russ
calls
No
Washington.
no
it
JavaScript.
does
does
all
Yeah.
of this.
It's
Yeah.
it's
So, well, no.
primarily
So you're
Well, this
writing,
is a whole
as opposed
function.
to they
right,
don't
but you haven't
really
called
do
it
very
yet, so
much
you
without
call this and it
Yeah.
just runs through all
in
of
no
this.
JavaScript. Like it just they make everything just
Yeah.
functional
But if
calls
we
to
were to
functions and
uncomment this,
just
I would think
ugly.
that would be like
Then
the
it would
ideal
have
place to have like a lot of
entering
do a lot of like
leaving
prototypical
Eastern
inheritance.
market.
Yeah, I can try that right now.
You'd think, but there's a lot of languages that don't structure around that way. But yeah, so after lunch, we're gonna do just kind of little app build. So that's just you guys writing JavaScript and writing a little kind of mini app.
Mhm.
And so I hope that'll be useful for everybody. And then we'll probably do prototype inheritance around 2:30 or so.
So when you get the new repo and you're just trying to read the code and everything, you find yourself like
See, that's
a lot of
when
times just
I'm
trying to
talking about
execute some of it, maybe do some console log just to get a feel for it.
Yeah, console log is definitely kind of the bread and butter to go to for just seeing
and
what the
it
thing's
doesn't
doing.
show,
Yeah.
it doesn't do
The
this.
first thing that I always look for is trying
This
to
can't see in here,
minimize scope on the thing,
right?
like kind of identify what is a known
'Cause it's
quantity
still,
and what's
like,
not.
it's still declaring one
And
global.
As you get
Yeah.
better, and
So
I
you
feel like
can't
the
think
kind of
that
trademark of
scope
good
is
JavaScript
Eastern
is JavaScript
But
has
if you
figured
were
out
to
how to
change-
condense scope in
So
terms
if
of
you
scopes
were
are very
to
modular and very succinct, and they're not deeply nested. Because deeply nested, you incur the entire debt of the scope chain. And then you need to be aware of the entire scope chain in order to map what anything is doing.
Don't we have a lot of nested in like chorus, a lot of nested
Lots
But it
and
still
lots of
overrides
things.
it.
Which, again,
Oh, yeah,
like today, we're
here.
going to be doing some
Because that's in
object-oriented
that's in the
programming with just building simple
No,
objects.
'cause it has
And the
to-
reason that I always
whereas,
lean in
like,
that direction is
outside
that you're
here,
minimizing,
it's not
you're working on an object itself, and you're minimizing scope by just attaching
this
methods to an object and letting
is part of the
object store the data, and you're never really getting deep with
Yeah,
nested
there's
population. And it's
scopes.
declared.
Like,
here.
and so
But it
whenever I look at a
overrides.
new piece of JavaScript, it'll always be like, first of
Oh,
all,
'cause it's-
identify what you don't
yeah.
know
But-
inside of
but
this
the
thing. Like,
one
what is the
function
magic
is
stuff that
because
does not
it's in
exist
Eastern
inside of this
market.
file?
it's in
What
this
is the
place,
unknown that's
whereas
not represented
because you're
here?
not declaring the bar
And
or whatever, like,
I
if you
will
put
give
bar
us
here, it
credit
would
that
be-
a lot of the Vox front end
But-
is
but
pretty good
bar-
about not having too many magic variables that are just coming from someplace.
Oh, okay.
They at least they're using
They
namespaces,
space a lot. So.
but the namespaces are a little bit more like you can kind of figure out if this thing is hooking onto the util dot whatever. Okay, I'm going to look at the
Oh,
util
'cause this
file,
population
and this is the
is inside the
namespace for this
Yeah.
thing that's being referenced. So I mean, that's better.
So if you
but,
uncomment this,
Yeah,
you should have
for
two different
structuring
populations.
JavaScript, just less scope.
Yeah.
Less scope
Oh,
is always
weird.
better, I think.
Weird.
But there are many philosophies on that. And the thing that really gets me about something like Node is that, then it becomes this art form of
Are
reducing
you having fun?
scope
I
in terms
get
of
it.
reducing
It's
scope
fun.
testing.
get it.
And so there's this
But
art form of like, hey, we're going to use
also
promises instead of deeply nested scopes.
hurts.
We're just going to use promises
It's
to
just like
chain things.
Knowledge.
And then we use
Yeah,
a library to
it's
go and do that. And then we go and we compose these crazy promise chains. And you're just like, but
This.
we're
You
kind of,
understand this.
making an art
Exactly.
form
So I
of
think
trying to
it's
go and
added
keep our code readable and clean.
Because
which
I
is just-
uncommented
Okay, so
this.
let's
It shouldn't be
So,
the initiative should be developing software,
so
not
we're-
like
we're
developing software and
Yeah.
making effort to go and keep the thing in a clean, organized way. So I'm not a huge proponent of Node JavaScript.
This hasn't,
That's not
This
maybe a
goes
level
up.
2 promises.
Right.
so it's 500.
Promises are better than deeply nested
Yes.
closures. Promises are actually
Then
ridiculously
you do
cool.
the population.
And on the front end,
Then
they're
it's
great
one
because
hundred
everything has
is
got to be
this
async. Like the front end lends itself to got to do all this crap asynchronously because you can't block the UI out. And on the back end, I feel like a lot of people are under the impression that they need everything to be async.
Yeah.
And I figure that like maybe 1 out of every 10 Node apps actually needs to be async. Like Blake's doing something. He got started this asset service, which makes a lot of sense as an async service.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Like,
Sounds like I think that's the same thing you would use async for in like a Rails app or something, like a long running job or something.
Yeah.
It's probably the same thing you would find in Node.js.
Yep.
But beyond that, like a simple call to just some simple JavaScript, it's going to happen so quick.
yeah, and like running an app, like running an Express app, which Express is like the lightweight. It would be kind of akin to Sinatra or something.
Okay.
So that's
But then why do you need asynchronous programming to go and run the equivalent of a Sinatra app? It doesn't, it's silly. Okay, so I
Nothing
think,
important in there, man. Just check it all.
I think there's a select all option.
Yeah, but it's I actually read the titles.
That was a
but
lot cooler.
No, I actually read the senders when I'm doing that.
Oh,
You're probably going to let DevOps just like random craziness, right?
No, it's mostly it's like
Do you like tweet that?
GitHub. I don't like pull requests and stuff that I ignore.
You have to
Okay, so I think lunch is coming at 12:30,
Yeah, but
and we'll kick off at 1:30 again. We'll do like a 1 hour coding
That's
exercise,
Buzz only.
and then we'll do prototypal inheritance at about 2:30. Okay,
What? Sorry.
so lunch is going to be at 12:30 again. Sounds like we'll kick back off at 1:30. We'll do like a 1 hour coding exercise of building a little kind of object-oriented JavaScript app, and then we'll follow up that with prototypal inheritance probably around 2:30. Cool.
Stream is going to be
Chipotle. Wow.
Chipotle is my life.
Oh boy.
Hey, Scott, you still there?
Hey, yeah.
Yeah, hey, did you hear the plan?
Yeah, we're cutting out until 1:30.
Yep.
Cool.
Sorry,
Thanks.
I kind of haven't been talking to you very much.
No, it's
Everything going okay on your end?
Yeah, I'm good. It's a little like Inception today, but yeah, getting the hang of it.
Okay, cool. Making sense? Any questions or anything?
It's all making sense now. Yeah.
Good. Okay, well, we will see you at 1:30.
All right. See you then.
Yep, bye.